running order. So Peter will make the seminal contribution, and then members will make a briefer contribution, some comments, and then António will make some comments, and then we'll throw the discussion open to the floor. So I'd like to invite Peter Herrmann to take the stage. Thank you, Peter.
Well, actually, it's actually the question moral and human rights. I made a presentation already in writing, and I only want to briefly extend on this. In a way, it's a topic that on the one hand came up again and again, and it is this tension, if you want, that we are talking about rights as a matter of a legal institution, and at the same time we always refer back to some notion of moral assessment of what should be a legal right. So this actually bothers me since years, since donkey years, that I'm always stuck and say we are talking about rights, and this has to be a matter of legal rights, and we cannot refer to any moral notion or whatsoever, because then you open the field actually for very arbitrary approaches to it. So the problem, or one of the problems, is that we are dealing with some very general rights, where we easily can agree it's the right for life or whatsoever, something like this, torture. But even there, you can easily come up to this borderline of yeah, there is a right, there is no problem with assessing it, accepting it as a right, but under certain conditions, as we saw under the conditions of the pandemics, we are actually struggling with it and say, where does it really start? What is the right to life, to living, including this border, or this blurring borders between right to life, to live, and to living. What is life about? So what I think is looking at it in historical terms has to be as well about looking at it in some respect of linking it to the development of the productive forces. Of course, being economist in this sense, and saying we have to look at what is actually possible in terms of the development of the productive forces. This is on the one hand a matter of national perspectives, that in one country something more is possible than in another country or region, but as well that we have to think about what does this development of productive forces actually mean. And then we come to this, I think, very fundamental aspect of human rights, that we have to allow to say there are different ways of what we accept actually as matter of what the productive, what the mode of production is. We are living, and this is, I think, very clear when we look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This had been capitalism globalizing in terms of defining the United States model as hegemonic. You have all the debates on Rostov and modernization and around this. This was at the same time, this was in sociology, Parsons, and this was the so-called constitutional state, with a very specific understanding of what democracy is as well. So we have all this linked. And this is then, I think, very important to keep this in mind, to say this is one model, but there are different models standing or relating, not relating to each other. So we have to look at this as the corner, as the main point of what is actually, what do we accept as something that is the framework, or that this is the foundation of these rights. Marx, in the introduction to the political economy, I think, was writing about production in terms of producing something in real terms, not necessarily commodities. This is important already. Distribution, consumption and exchange. Production, consumption, distribution, exchange, this sequence. This is, I think, we have to take as point of reference when we talk about human rights, that we say this is not a moral issue, but this is what we can actually do. Then considering the basic understanding of, I think, in general accepted social science approach, human beings are social beings. And this is defined by the way how they produce and reproduce themselves in terms of daily life. So this is still a very general framework, but it is not allowing any escape into moral issues, but provides a framework or foundation where we can say, on this basis, we have to assess how individuals can realize themselves as social beings. And then we have, of course, very general issues. To be alive is a very basic issue there, but at the same time, it means, and then we can discuss it in this framework, what does it mean under these conditions? And then we have as well, coming back to the pandemics, which employed us for a long time now, we have this framework of saying, yes, it is something where we have to consider as well the issue of self-realization, but not as individuals competing with others, but as something where we say it is about individuals as social beings with the responsibility they take. So I leave it there. I refer to what I sent, and I'm elaborating this now in a different context. As I say, it is and will always be an open issue, but I think it is important as well to link it back to some economic processes.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter Herrmann, all the way from Berlin via the Human Rights Center in Central South University in Changsha, the wonders of modern technology.
The European branch.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much for that. So at this point, I'm going to now give the podium and the microphone, as it were, to Mehmet, who is joining us from Ankara University, if I'm correct in that.
Middle East Technical University.
Thank you, Mehmet.
Okay, thank you very much. First, I have to say, like always, I will approach politically to provoke António. I make a joke, António, because I understand you always, and ideologically seen. So I want to say some words. If we are looking from an historical standpoint to morality, then we can see, this is the first thing I want to say, that morality is always linked with power. And morality has never been in a, how can we say, a sort of oppositional issue from below. It was always present in history to develop life strategies of life. For example, look to the Middle Ages, to the church. The church decided morally what was good, what was bad. Morality has always been additionally something ideologically, and ideology production is always related to ideology. Now we could say that what I'm saying is not moral. We could say this as an intervention to me, and we could say this is moralization. Of course, these are two different things, but morality is always in history linked together with moralization. Like religion is always linked to institutionalization. Religion was never spiritual as such because it was institutional. So morality also was always in history moralization. And moralization or morality, it is mixed together. We can it's very difficult to disconnect them from each other. And this sort of moralization or morality did always legitimize positions, also in the question of human rights. For example, the USA, I mean, nowadays everyone's speaking of Russia, I know, but the USA has always morally legitimated each of their interventions in the world, each of the interventions, starting with Vietnam, also earlier, things we know in history. So this sort of moral, a sort of moral which is dominating the private forms of morality, has always covered, how can we say, the critical view to events and relations in history. This is a sort of wheel which is laid beyond. So I will also say that, for example, the relation between the foreigner and the bourgeois state is not the problem of abstract moralization. Last time we have spoken about this also with António. It is a sort of practical intervention, for example. So I think it's a thesis. We should prevent a moralizing or moral discourse in politics, but not in the pre-political sphere. I would distinguish this. So the political sphere I have now explained, we should not use it there, but in a life sphere, in a pre-political sphere, it could be used. Then morality can become a sort of self-reflection, which can be linked to concrete implications and implementations. So again, on individual level, yes, I would agree morality is important and very important, but this is what I would call, again, pre-political. But on the political level, it should be prevented also in bringing to the agenda. And if we do this, if this, how can we say, this line would be practiced, I would say, ideal typical scene, then this sort of moral would be clearly there without any articulation. And this is the best thing, if morality is existent without having the need to speak about it. And this is like identity. The best identity is the identity which we do not have to defend. The best identity is the identity which I don't speak about. I remember myself in Germany. I always was aware who I am. I returned to Turkey. This is one manifestation of this. But I had never the feeling to present permanently my identity. And this is really the identity. So morality, which is not outspoken, is real morality. And this can only be possible in the pre-political sphere. So again, finally, we should prevent the moral discourse. We should not use it in politics. And we should limit it to subject-subject relations to create a sort of permanent and stable manifestation of something, I think. So morality is important, but not on every level. And this would be my short, I have mentioned this also before, my short approach to this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mehmet. And then lastly and briefly, as I understand it, António, dialing in from Spain. António, I shall give you the floor.
Yeah, just a small correction for a little mistake. I'm not from Spain, I'm from Portugal. Never mind.
That's like saying, yeah, I'm from England instead of Ireland. Yeah, something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. I was my position as chair forthwith.
No problem.
This was unconsciously ideological political, Joe. I criticize you because of this.
Yeah. Anyway, I speak from Greece today because I'm not in Portugal. I'm in Greece, and thank you very much, Peter, and thank you very much, Mehmet. I think I like very much your articulation because I think you, as far as I understood, you tried also to integrate some of our discussion, and I particularly appreciated the differentiation between individual morality and social morality. I understand. I understand, and I can see your point of view. Nevertheless, trying to go back a little bit to a previous argument, I would give a very loose reflection on the idea also that maybe we can think about moral as not necessarily relative or cultural if we think in terms of what we can call the post-conventional moral. Okay, this was my argument since we started to discuss. I understand very well the need not to institutionalize the defense of human rights. Nevertheless, maybe human rights in a certain perspective can be also understood as a kind of post-conventional moral. So it's not as something that should be done or is imposed, but as a reference, a moral reference that can help us to deal with specific problems. And I would like just to connect this idea with the notion of natural law, the possibility that we conceptualize besides civil laws what can be called natural law. And by chance, I was just recently trying to find literature about the psychology of human rights. And I found a book that deals with the topic in the perspective of psychology. And in the conclusion of the book, there is a reference to how the Stoics dealt with this in one of the first instances. And I would, if you allow me, I would like to read a passage that might be an interesting input. Maybe you know, of course, this because you are more inside this area than me. Nevertheless, I found it with some value, at least for me, regarding this discussion. And this has to do with the fact that this comes from a French researcher, Maurice Craston, and he reminds us on the fact that already in the city-states of ancient Greece, citizens enjoyed the rights to freedom of expression and to equality before the law. And then Craston argues that in the Hellenistic period, which followed the destruction of the city-states, people could no longer, and I'm quoting now, people could no longer think of these as civil rights because there was no civil society in which to realize them. And so the Stoic philosophers reformulated them as universal rights. something which men under all forms of government and all times were entitled to enjoy. They saw these rights not as rooted in civil law, but in an higher law, which reason and nature combined to reveal to men. It was not altogether unlike that law of the gods that some religious thinkers had always said existed above and beyond the law of princes and magistrates. But the Hellenistic Stoics saw no need to invoke the deities. For them, the law that was higher than any positive law was natural law. So, and he continues, and it says, it seems that in a similar conception, transcending specific social conditions, also underlies the conclusions of a discourse held by Václav Havel, 1999, during the air raids by NATO forces on Kosovo. It was, and he quotes Václav Havel in this way: I had often asked myself why human beings have any rights at all. I always come to the conclusion that human rights, human freedoms, and human dignity have their deepest roots somewhere outside the perceptible world. These values are as powerful as they are because under certain circumstances, people accept them without compulsion and are willing to die for them, and they make sense only in the perspective of the infinite and the eternal. So, end of quotation. And with this, I would finish my intervention. Thank you.
I think I'm back.
No, yes.
Thank you, Peter. The real chair, the power behind the chair, obviously. Thank you, António, for that very interesting intervention all the way from Portugal via Greece, as if you know what I mean, not Spain. Okay, so we've had, so thank you, Peter, thank you, Mehmet, and thank you, António. We have other colleagues here. I can't see them on the screen, but we have Yuan and Theo, I think. And I don't know who else is joining us. I don't know if... Peter, can you see who else is joining us?
Yeah, Dennis is as well there, from Turkey.
Oh yes, hi Dennis. Okay, so I'm going to... We've had some interesting reflections from Peter. Squarely, you might say, putting his contribution placed in the context of a classical Marxist understanding of the central role of the development of the productive forces, Marx's classic understanding, you might say, and that Mehmet, so broadly speaking, a socioeconomic paradigm, and then Mehmet, in his contribution, engaging with issues of power and institutionalization, and making a distinction between the political and the pre-political sphere, and suggesting that morality, when we speak of morality, that should be, in a sense, without oversimplification, confined to the interpersonal or pre-political sphere. And then António bringing in a psychological dimension and referring to some historical origins of a conceptualization of a general morality, and then bringing it up to the present, some reflections by Václav Havel. So I don't know if other colleagues have any thoughts or questions for our three presenters.
Well, I would have at least a question to the other presenters, to Mehmet. first, how do you, as I say upfront, I don't have a solution, I don't have an answer to this, but how do you translate this into law, considering that we have to translate it into law? And to António, the question, if you go back in history, you have had the civil society, but the civil society was not the society, but it was a very small group of the society. So slaves had been excluded, women had been excluded, and this was considered to be natural. So this is something where I have my problems to accept this, including then myself on a personal level, if you want. If I hear certain cases, I changed my mind actually in if you want, in personal history, that I would say what I rejected up to a certain point, I would justify now if I see, for instance, how the United States deal with Cuba, in particular in Guantanamo, the Bay. This is something where I think we have to consider as well this kind of acceptance. In a way, I could interpret what you said. Yes, of course, it's their right. It's part of humanity. But at the same time, and I think this is important, we always deal with conflicts. You can translate this into what Mehmet said, a matter of power, but we have always as well the counterpower. And this thing I think is important to think about. And putting it into law then.
Can I make a contribution, also adding Peter's question? I think the interesting point is also, I want to say it also to António, because he has to have spoken of natural law, António. Natural law in the beginning was a moral oppositional attitude. It was a moral attitude. And it was developed by the so-called rich Athenian young people who were theoretically and morally against slavery, but this became never political in a positive sense. Later, when this speech of general morality was left by side, and when we have the beginning of a social struggle for implementation concrete, then this, what I meant, then I would say, then this personal morality became, the people showed the limits of this personal morality, but used it then at the same time as a sort of basis for implementing it. And then it became something legal, I would say. This is the relation, in my opinion, I mean, very broadly spoken now. So this private morality really became private, and it was perceived as such, and then it was tried to be implemented in the political struggle really. And then morality became something really political, but not in the sense I mentioned, something really political. And then it became implemented into legal institutional systems, Declaration of Human Rights, etc., all the things we know. I think this is the chronology. And I would say again that this implementation needs the limitation of morality to the private and the understanding that this is private, and then creating a philosophical basis for this implementation. And this all in together would create a legal platform. I mean, this is only something I say now, I'm now loudly thinking, but I think this is the chronology which would be correct. But morality as in itself can never be implemented, and it is negatively political. Only when this chronology passes, then it becomes maybe something valuable, constructive, and really having something to do with human rights as social rights at the same time.
Okay, thank you, Mehmet. António, did you want to reply to?
Yeah. Okay, we have been trading these ideas and discussing about this. So sometimes I feel that there is also a problem of concepts and language here that because my feeling is that sometimes we might use the same concept of the same word, but with in different meanings, which is very natural to occur because we are also from different disciplines. But trying to clarify my perspective, I understand very well the notion that Mehmet suggests that morality should be. Morality is positive in the private level or in the individual level, but it's problematic in the political level. I understand this concept, but what I'm trying to convey is the notion that when morality is managed in a post-conventional level, this might also go in the political sphere without the danger that that was exposed. And I explain myself. When I talk about a post-conventional morality, I talk about not ideas of what is wrong or right in a specific level, but I talk about the a notion of what is wrong or right in a more how can I, it's difficult to articulate this, but I would say more in a platonic level, if you want, okay? And this is where we touch religion. I understand that when religion becomes institutionalized, religion becomes a context of moralization. But there is a level of religion that is beyond institutions, and that gives us a reference that from a moral point of view might be functional. For instance, when we talk about the basic rights of every human to his own integrity, okay, I'm talking about something very basic. Everybody has the right to exist. Everybody has the right to be free of infliction of pain or infliction of torture. My feeling is that this goes beyond conventional morality, and this might go in the level of what is called post-conventional morality. I don't know if we go back to the previous discussion or if we go further.
António,
sure. Yeah,
I will say something again, and maybe I'm speaking too much, but I have the feeling that what you are suggesting, which I emotionally understand, is that you will present morality as a holistic issue, which is clear. Yeah, you will say it can be a holistic issue. Huh? It can be something which is both trying to construct something more than only some steps of politics, and can be at the same time institutionalized in a positive way. You want to have these steps together. Huh? Am I right? You're wrong. You understand this together. And what I'm saying is that we first should try to distinguish this methodologically, because it never comes together. For example, if morality, what is private morality, which is abstract? For example, if I'm rich, my father has billions of dollars, let's say, this example, and I have a Ferrari, I go through a poor quarter, huh? And for 2 minutes, my conscience is, I have a burden. Huh? I think, Mehmet, it's a bad world. Huh? I'm sad for 2 minutes. This is a sort of moral opposition which lasts 2 minutes. And this is the problem. You cannot bring these things together. This is the same thing with general human morality, which can never be brought to the level of implementation. So I think, I suggest it again, we should first see the distinction. between this abstract form and the necessity to implement things. And when we distinguish this and locate it correctly, then we can bring them together. But I would say from themselves, they cannot come together. So my abstract morality in this example will remain totally individualistic. Nothing will change in my life. I will further live very luxury. And for 2 minutes per day, I will say, oh, Mehmet, the world is bad. So this is what I mean with this abstraction, this abstract side, which dissatisfies me. But I mean, we repeat the things we have spoken about. But I think, what shall I do? I think you should make this distinction first, and then bring the stones together. The mosaic stones would be my suggestion. And then we can implement it also legally.
Now I would like to come, probably it's not what I usually do, to come from a positive side. It's not about 2 minutes feeling bad, but it's about 2 hours feeling good. What I mean with it is that what you say is a individual morality is popping up and is being, Marx said, the idea is becoming a material force when it reaches the masses or something like this. The idea only emerges if the level of productive forces, if the mode of production allows. Meaning, it's okay if you feel bad for 2 minutes, but when can we, increasingly collective, come to the stage that we say it's not about the world being bad, but it's about the world possibly being better, because the means of production are there. We can be better. It is not about individuals who have this luxurious life, but it is a level where we can say we all can reach this. It is as well something where, of course, we talked about, and this is a new issue in human rights debates, where we can say we have this conflict in environmental terms. Production means producing CO2 emission. Production means being bad for the environment. But now we reach a level where we are actually not only aware of this is bad, but where we are becoming aware of we can do it in another way. And this is my point, where I link it back. It's not about individual morality, but it is only when this morality reaches a stage, coming back to the question of women, when we say it is not necessary that women are in kind of this level of societal development, it is not necessary that women are in this oppressed situation, but we can do better. And this is my kind of, there must be an objective foundation. It's not about me feeling whatsoever.
Yeah. But can I say something regarding this, and also thinking about what Mehmet said? But what it maybe where I was trying to understand where we disagree, because I think we agree, but it's just a question of different since we are sensible in different levels. This is my feeling. I think we agree in conceptual terms, but we have different sensitivities in the sense that I have the feeling that if a society constructs the notion of human rights as something that is universal, this might function as a reference that transforms somehow things. I agree that this transformation might not be enough. And I agree even that the fact that there are these institutionalized human rights, this might be an excuse not to do nothing. I understand what you say, and I understand the problems of implementation. But and maybe this is because I come from psychology. It seems to me that the existence of these human rights as a reference might constitute a stimulus first to create some change of behavior, because they give us a reference of what might be appropriate or not appropriate in a more general way, independently of the culture or independent of the social context we are living. This is my feeling. Understanding that is not enough, understanding that it might be used as an excuse. My feeling is that these references might somehow also help us to regulate our behaviors. And this goes back also to the idea of religion that we talked in a previous meeting, because religion can give, of course, we know that the consequences from a historical point of view might be disastrous. We don't have to remind this. We know this, but at the same time, religion might give a reference to people on behaviors that are appropriate in a certain contexts and in certain moments. Okay, I'm thinking about in terms of general principles that have to do with the basic things that are common to all human beings. Anyway, in these discussions, I always also have the feeling that I go more in a raw perspective against a more elaborate perspective that I understand very well, and that I thank you very much for this input, because I'm learning a lot with this more sociological or political or economical perspective, besides the psychological perspective. By the way, just as a very short note, in this same psychological research about human rights, there is one interesting study about the personal differences regarding human rights. Meaning it's a study about how we can detect different patterns of positions, personal positions regarding the conceptualization of human rights. And this goes from people that are very skeptic to people that accept this in a very naive way. So the range of reactions also is interesting to consider when we discuss among ourselves, and we have different perspectives about this topic.
Can I ask you something, António? In your function as a psychologist, am I right? It's a serious question. My experience in my personal life, let's say, in the 60 years I live, is that the people, because you said we can construct something out of this more individual morality as a reference, when I have understood you correctly. Yeah. Most of the people I know who are most of the time speaking of morality are not very moral. And most of the people among my friends who are never using this word morality are very moral. So then how can then out of this individual situation, let's say, of dialectics, how can the result then be something positive out of this? Huh? Because as I said, this is my experience. The people who are never using the word morality are most of the time moral. And the other ones not. It's like conservatism. Conservatism speaks of ideal norms, but they are most of the time thinking of money. This is the dialectic. This is one of the definitions of conservatism.
Yeah, but I would say, Mehmet, but I would say that the people that don't talk in terms of moral, but they behave in a moral way, they internalized moral references in a post-conventional level. This is what I mean. This,
and you mean they can constitute something in this context without articulating it? It would be possible only by their behavior.
I would say I understand very well what you say, and I agree totally. When people that articulate what we should do, what we shouldn't do, normally from a behavioral point of view, they are beyond. Maybe because they are beyond, they need to articulate. I understand this. And very often people that behave in what we would say in a way that is more coherent with the fundamentals of human rights, they don't moralize. They just behave in this way. Yeah. So it's also the idea that you teach more by example than by saying. Yeah, I understand this, but the hypothesis is that maybe there is a possible articulation of these post-conventional principles of behavior, not in a moralizing way. That's what I speak. I understand what you say, that when we articulate these as laws, we moralize. Yeah, that's a problem. That's a problem. But my hypothesis is that it might be possible that some articulation of general principles is functional in certain contexts. This is my only hypothesis. I understand that more legalization of human rights transforms very quickly in moralization, and then we lack implementation. Yeah.
When you mentioned earlier, António, you made reference to religion in the positive sense, which I see and accept. If I then think at the same time about the Crusades, not talking about what is going on today, I lived long enough in Rome to know what is going on there. This is the other side. Trying to get a solution there as well to what Mehmet said. Isn't it possible that not talking about moral rights or morality is something where we find actually in many cases as well when it comes to these conflicts, I wouldn't do this on an individual level or the lower level, the immediate social level, I behave in a different way than I would do so in society, in this society, in my society. So that I have there, on a small scale, the possibility, the opportunity to be advanced in, and then I come back to what I said before, to the production, more advanced in the production of daily life. Meaning, even if I'm living in under miserable conditions, I have this power of self-determination in some way, at least in this small framework. And then I can, without referring to morals, to morality, I can behave in a way that is more appropriate, more in line with what you say is a post-conventional attitude or something. As soon as it is about, and then I come back to what Mehmet said in the beginning, to the societal level with its power structure, there we are talking about power, and there we are talking about, you mentioned money, there we are talking today in most societies, we are talking about capitalist mode of production. Marx, capital, first sentence, wealth measured in terms of the commodities. So, and that means talking about competition, talking about this way of production. So I think there may be a solution, especially if we differentiate between the different social levels, individual, small groups, small societies, sub-societies or whatever, and then society at large, that we there come to a solution and to say it's not about morality, but it is about the to which extent where I am with my thinking about the advancement of productive forces. Mr. Chair is getting angry now. No,
as well. Two things. One is the procedural. I'm just looking at the time, so we need to thank you for all those interesting contributions. Just to make one brief contribution myself, I think perhaps an explicit opening up to the, rather than using the term morality, which in my ears has a pejorative and negative connotation, the normative dimension to society, and bringing in Habermas, for example, as a much more positive ring to it. And I'm reminded in terms of normative dimension, and also perhaps the ideological dimension, which can exist at that micro level for sure, but also can be institutionalized in the form of religion, or as embodied in to varying and contradictory extents in the legal system of a society, and in the discourse of a society that brings in discourses and ideologies and norms of human rights. But I'm also thinking the role of ideology in classical Marxism is usually seen as a negative thing, a tool used by the ruling forces to mystify. And in that sense, I think a lot of our discussions a lot of the critical discussion of human rights is that it does, a discourse of human rights is used to mask the motives and the actions of the ruling class, as Mehmet alluded to, or also to mask the operations of the system itself. And Marx talked about one particular norm, institutionalization of norms, religion. Religion is the opium of the people, I think, in the Communist Manifesto. But I'm also thinking of Albert Hirschman, the American political scientist who wrote a book called The Rhetoric of Reaction. And while he discussed the role of ideology as a mask for political or economic interests hidden in the discourse, or the discourse used to hide the actual operations of the system. He also suggested that ideology can have a different function, which can be as a he used the term, referring to Greece, and this ties perhaps with Mehmet then, his reference to the classical world. He referred to the possibility of norms and ideology serving as a nessus cloak. And those of you familiar with Greek mythology will know that Nessus was the protagonist, if you like, of Hercules. Nessus attempted to rape Dinara, Hercules' wife, and as Hercules, of course, slew Nessus, who was a centaur, half man, half horse, and as he lay dying, Nessus whispered to Dinara, Hercules' wife, that if she dipped Hercules' cloak in his blood, when Hercules threatened to become when he threatened to become unfaithful, if she wrapped Hercules in this cloak, this would restore his fidelity. But of course, it was a poisoned cloak and stuck to him and caused him such agony, he threw himself on a big funeral pyre. So, sorry, long-winded story, but the point being that Hirschman suggested that in certain contexts, certain ideologies could function as a nessus cloak, which would restrain or provide norms that the state or institutions or the ruling classes promise, if you like, to adhere to, and which the popular classes would hold them to which the popular classes might hold them accountable. So I think ideology and the normative dimension brief can be quite multifunctional, or can operate in different ways in different times. In certain contexts, it can be a mask, but in other contexts, it can be a nessus cloak. I think perhaps human rights discourse can function in ambivalent or ambiguous or contradictory ways in a similar fashion. But after having hugged, after that relatively long little speech, I am in my role as chair. I note that we are past the meeting time. It's 11:05. We've had some interesting, very interesting contributions, I think, from differing perspectives. I think obviously lots of more questions than answers, as all our contributors have acknowledged. So on that basis, I propose to call the meeting to an end, unless, Peter, have you some kind of operational or business suggestions as to how we proceed or when we meet next?
Not really. There had been a second point on the agenda, but we shouldn't look at this now. That during our preparatory meeting, Mehmet came actually up with a kind of conclusion or something, how to move on with this research we intended to do with the new publication on implementation, which is, I think, and this was where he came into it, linked to this question of human rights and implementation and these things. So we have to keep this, I think, for the next time to move things on in terms of setting a research agenda, which from my view back from on the discussion, there is something that emerged from here.
So thank you to Peter, thank you to Mehmet, António from Spain, Portugal, Greece.
Universal.
Dennis. So thank you.